Last episode we had a glimpse of what Nextage could do, but this time we can see the card in its full glory, and it's glorious!
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another episode of The Road to Nextage, and just like the last episode, this episode is gonna be dedicated to the big guy himself, of course, Chrono Dragon Nextage. And this time it's gonna be the main feature of the episode instead of at the end of the episode where we talk about what we saw in the anime, because this time we had the official reveal of the card alongside a brand new Grade 2 Triple R that is Smoke Gear Dragon. So in this episode we're going to take a deeper dive into those specific two cards to have a better understanding what type of combos, interactions and implications those cards will have for Gear Chronicle. But if you want to have a general idea of what the skill does and how it interacts with the clan, then I highly advise you to check out this video of the Cardfight update that we did yesterday, where I went over the initial reveals. But in that episode, I also go over the new information that we got for the trial deck or legend deck for the Majesty Lord Blaster, as well as some extra information concerning the extra booster set, the Nextage. So quick refresher for anybody that isn't up to speed. The skill for Chrono Dragon Nextage is of course what we expect it to be, with some extra restrictions, as its ability is auto on Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle that attacked a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, if your soul as a Chronodragon Dragon cost, discard 2 cards from your hand, retire this unit, write a Chronodragon Dragon from your soul as stand, and until the end of turn, this unit gets power plus 15k, and you cannot write. So basically, this cannot be done if you went first and your opponent is still at grade 2, so you need to wait a turn. And of course, you need to specifically have a Chronodragon Dragon in your soul. However, it doesn't state that you need to have ridden on top of Chronodragon Dragon, so you could basically sit on something else like Lost Legend or maybe Chrono Tiger and then go into this thing, and if you happen to put a Chronojet Dragon into your soul some way, or it's already there, and then you can rewrite back to Chronojet. So it gives a little bit more flexibility. Also, the cannot write clause, basically when you write back to Chronojet Dragon, you can no longer rewrite that specific turn. So the whole end of turn clause where you need to retire your grade 4 and then rewrite a grade 3 from a soul, that entire effect doesn't happen anymore, and it's only for that specific turn. The following turn, you can write normal as per usual. See it as the same kind of restriction that Mystery Flare does when you get the extra turn, where you cannot normal write or not write that specific extra turn itself. The big question, of course, is Chrono Dragon Nextage good? In my personal opinion, hell yes, it's good, because it's a restander that's basically for free. As you get a Trin Drive, and you discard 2 cards to get the extra attack off. And you give the following attack extra power, so you get actual free value from that. That's super cheap, super easy, and is pretty good, because any other restander forces you to either set something up, pay a ridiculous amount of cost, or draw into the specific cards. Like Claritor, for example, you need to set up your grade 1s in drop zone. With Rier, you need to be able to draw into multiple copies of the card. For Chrono Dragon Nextage, you do not have to do any of that. The only thing that you need to do is be able to write to grade 3. Because if you happen to go to Chrono Dragon, you can use its ability to fetch out Nextage from the deck and then write it through that way, and you're basically done. So that, in my opinion, is a pretty good skill. But the fact that it follows up into a Chronojet Dragon, which in itself has a force marker, so you get an additional force marker, but also that card has an on-attack, gain extra power, and a Sentinel restriction on top of that, is insanely strong, as it allows you to hit with a second attack, which will swing in with a null restriction, which basically means your opponent is likely going to take the attack, unless they have an entire hand filled with cards. But that's basically the entire combo on its own. There is way more support for Gear Chronicle to abuse it in some kind of way, or just basic tactics that we can deploy. On first glance, you're basically thinking, alright, you're gonna go for Force 1 because you're going to get multi-text with your Vanguard, so stacking that Force 1 onto the Vanguard is very good, especially with the null restriction for the second attack. But with the extra power you can gain with Gear Chronicle and the way that you're driving multiple triggers, you could also potentially go for Force 2. Because this way, if you happen to go second and your opponent is at grade 3, You can ride the Grade 3, get a Force 2 onto your Vanguard, so that means you probably need to guard your first Vanguard swing, and then when you rewrite back, you can give one of your still standing rearguards also an extra critical with the second Force 2 marker, which is pretty good. But then you can say, well, you're losing power on your Vanguard swings. However, don't forget, you have effectively 4 drive checks. 2 on your first Vanguard attack and 2 on your second Vanguard attack. And you can leave the booster standing. So what you can do is basically attack with the Nextage unboosted and go into your opponent. They can probably guard that and will likely guard it. And you can give your potential triggers to the booster. Meaning, you effectively pass on the power to Chronodragon for the following attack. And then Chronodragon has the twin drive on its own. So there you can see that you have multiple tactics available to you. But another big thing about this card is that this specific Grade 4 doesn't have the restriction that you cannot ride it from hand. And that is pretty big. Because unlike any other Grade 4 within Gear Chronicle, it rides you back to a Grade 3, meaning the following turn you can still rewrite back into a Grade 4 with the pseudo stride skill as you're sitting on Chronodragon. So in some regard, this is the same as Exculpate in Royal Paladin, which gives you a lot of flexibility. So unlike any other Grade 4s in your deck, you don't mind them to actually draw them into your hand. And because of that fact, we can run less copies of Quickie Worker, as you don't really have to shuffle them back to your deck, which then opens up more space in your Grade 1 slots as well. But there is even more options available to us thanks to the new addition in our Grade 2 lineup in the form of Gear Dragon. Because Gear Dragon as a Grade 2 is of course a very solid early game aggro 2 and also a mid to late game option, as it allows us to draw more cards. But its main utility option lies in its continuous rearguard circle that synergizes with Chronodragon, where every card in your hand counts as a Grade 3. Because this effect of Gear Dragon opens up a lot of potential for gears. First off, it turns your entire deck into stride followers. This is good for standard as well as in premium, as it synergizes with both mechanics. But in standard, with the new addition of cards, it allows us to turn our discard cards into specific stride fodders, but also to activate their abilities on a more efficient basis. Because we got cards like Gear Dragon, as well as Chrono Tooth Tigar, and even some new cards within the new set that allows us to do something if we discard them. But the problem is with most of those cards is that there are Grade 1s and Grade 2s. So either we need to discard them with specific cards to just discard random cards in hand, or we need to discard them with other cards so we could pseudo-stride with cards like Lost Legend, Chrono Dragon, and Chrono Fang Tiger. Now with the ability of Gear Dragon, we can do both at the same time on a more efficient basis, as now a Grade 1 Gear Dragon can count as a Grade 3 discard, but also now we can activate its ability without sacrificing more cards from hand, which is a really nice synergy. But that's just on the cost part. We can also see it as a more interaction with other specific cards, because we also had a Grade 2 in the common section of this new set of the Nextage booster set, which got an extra 15k power if we discarded a total of Grade 3s or more from hand. With Gear Dragon, that's now always gonna be a discard 1, so that card is suddenly a lot better. It's not amazing by all means, but it's gonna be a lot more playable thanks to the effect of Gear Dragon. But the bigger implication, and this will then turn all the way back to Chronodragon Nextage as well as the very first support wave that we got for Gear Chronicle last year, as that's that we got cards that allow us to discard cards, but then activate extra effect on what type of grade we're discarding. And the specific card that I'm referring to in this situation is Memene. Because this Grade 1 allowed us to cycle through our deck. But if we discard a Grade 3, we could give 3 units plus 5k power. And this will go right back into Nextage. Because usually the card was mainly used to increase the consistency in the early game when we ride up to our grades, so we draw into our specific pseudo-strider Grade 3. Now that isn't necessarily the case anymore, as we have multiple options. But we can combine that effect with Gear Dragon and abuse it with Nextage, as the skill is a once per turn auto ability, and there's a discussion going on what that means, if you have the choice to activate it or not, if you're gonna ride your Vanguard. But we can circumvent the whole discussion, as we can just ride up to Nextage with the pseudo skill, and then we call these Memenes to the field, and then once we attack with Nextage and we ride back to Chronodragon, we can activate these Memenes to discard and draws, and if we have Gear Dragon, all those discards will always count as a grade 3. Meaning, we can increase the power output on our field basically for free. And if we combine it with a Force 2 strategy, that means our follow-up attack with Nextage itself for Chronodragon is gonna be incredibly powerful, as we can give the booster and Chronodragon both a plus 5k increase, meaning a plus 10 to the column. And that combined with the booster that can potentially have some extra triggers on top of that, means it's gonna be very, very powerful. And that's the opposite of Smoke Gear Dragon, as it allows us to utilize the skill in different ways. And I'm very curious if we're going to get more of these skills that not necessarily are discarding for a cost, but discarding for effects, in their effects itself, and then what type of grade you're discarding will then have a different kind of effect. So if we have these more cards like Memonace, then Smoke Gear Dragon can even become better than it already is. So that's a very interesting thing to look forward to. But if we cycle back to Nextage, there is one more interesting thing that we can discuss. Because we can see what type of power output we can put out with the card, with the extra restand, with Nextage power to Chronodragon's own null restriction with the extra power, the potential putting the triggers on the booster itself and keeping the booster standing, and then of course Memonace. That's all the possibilities that we have for Nextage and Chronojet for an attack pattern. But there's one more interesting card that has been on the back of my mind ever since it was released back in the Answer of Truth set. And that's a specific grade 1 Steam SCARA Kalane. And this grade 1 is gonna be huge for Gear Chronicle right now, as that grade 1 allows us to unboost Soul Blast 1, and then that specific attack your opponent can only guard with a maximum of 3 cards. That combined with a Chronodragon that specifically puts out perfect guards, which means your opponent needs to hard guard against it, can basically mean they can no longer guard that attack whatever they try. Because that attack will have at least 28k by Chronojet itself, but then Chronodragon will get another 5k, so that's a 33k on its own. That in with the boost is a 41k on its weakest. That's without Force 1. So this could be a 41k with Force 2. 2 critical, your opponent can no longer PG. That means they are most likely on a 13 or 12k base. If they're on a 13k base, that means they need to throw out 35k shields. That's a heal and a crit. But if we can maybe have a Memonace on the field, that's another 10k increase. So then they need specifically 3 cards. And if we get 1 or 2 triggers, we can overcome that amount of power very easily. If we went with Force 1, we can stack those 2 Force 1s onto the Vanguard circle, and then without any triggers or any specific power, that's already at a 61k power. Which means your opponent, if they guard with 3 heal triggers, they just barely guard against it with 2k over your power. So 1 trigger or 1 small power boost is enough to break to that shield. But that means they're having 3 heal triggers in hand to guard against it. If they have 2 heals and a crit or a front, that's not enough anymore for that attack. So this combo is gonna probably be Gear Chronicle's main finishing attack, where your opponent has no way of guarding it. Because even if they have a hand of 12 cards, it doesn't matter. They can't guard against an attack. They will take the damage. And if you happen to go for Force 2, that's 2. And if you went with Force 1, then if they're sitting at 4 damage, maybe you get a crit and you can seal the deal right then and there. So there's a lot of power potential within Nextage itself. And we only see the tip of the iceberg, because there are so many more combos that are gonna happen within this set to up the consistency. As in this video, I only went over the specific interactions with Nextage, which aren't that many, but it doesn't need to have that many to be strong, because a deck can revolve around multiple combos within multiple sets of cards than just specifically around one specific card. Because in the coming days, we're going to see a lot more interesting cards, as at the recording of this video, we saw another couple of cards revealed for Gear Chronicle, which are pretty interesting, and I'm going to go over that in the following Road to Nextage video, as they deserve their own spotlight, because those cards are something else for premium, as you can do some interesting interactions with those cards. But before I go, there's one more interesting thing that I want to note about Smoke Gear Dragon, is the card for the Continuous Rigid Circle skill that you can discard cards for a grade 3 isn't restricted during your turn, meaning it can also work during your opponent's turn. So specific cards that forces you to discard something and they will activate according to what type of grade you're discarding. You can manipulate the grade of your units for those skills as well. Which is interesting because we have cards that exactly do that. And on the top of my head we have cards for Nubatama that do that. Currently the cards that I can come up with my head, putting them to grade 3 is negative for you, as with the Nubatama you have Tsumichi Basho that will then gain a lot more power than if you just discard the grade 0. We have also Mega Colony that when you discard a specific grade, then you can guard with that grade, but that's not what you want to do with grade 3s. So this might be just a gimmick that's never gonna come up because you can just decide to not turn them into grade 3. But if it's ever so happened to be that discarding a higher grade is more effective than discarding a grade 1 or grade 2 or grade 0, then with Smoke here, you have the option to do that. So that's an interesting thing that they didn't make it during your turn. Also, I've seen some concern about Smoke Gear Dragon and Nextage being specifically restricted to Chrono Dragon. Don't be over concerned with that fact, because it's not unlikely for Bushiroad, if they ever gonna make a new version of a card, that they make a skill that states that that card is also regarded as the old version of the card, so it will synergize with the old support set. They have done this in the past, and if they're gonna make more support for Chrono Dragon, but they want to make an upgraded version of Chrono Dragon, I can see that definitely happen. So don't be over too concerned with that. And even if that's the case, we got more cards for Chrono Dragon. I mean, besides Nextage, we also have Gear Groovy or Gear Next, for example. So there's more than enough options for us to pull ideas and power for Gear Chronicle. So there's more than enough to look forward to in the far, far future. But for now, let's keep it at the near future, as there's still some interesting things on the horizon for the Nextage booster set. But even though we discussed Chronodragon Nextage himself, it doesn't mean that this is the end of the road to Nextage, because there are still some interesting cards left to be revealed. We have the Triple R Stride Fodder for Gear Chronicle, of course, and some Double Rs, and some low rarity cards that might be something interesting. So there's still a lot left to discuss, and once we get all the reveals and once we have seen everything, then of course I'm gonna make a sum up video where we're gonna see the entire road in one separate video, so we have a better understanding of where we came from and where we are right now, as things are looking pretty bright for Gear Chronicle, but we have to wait and see how bright that star actually is going to be. As always, guys, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. If you do want to support the channel, then head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!